people of Haksa-dae-ri, a coastal village in the South Hamgyong province of North Korea, are celebrating. Just 2 months ago, in September 2020, a deadly typhoon struck the east coast of the country and destroyed their homes. Now, thanks to the order of the Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un and the efforts of the People's Army soldiers, residents are already moving into newly built homes. The lady of the house opens the door and the family enters their new nest for the very first time. We see a small bathroom with a bath, a fully equipped kitchen with a traditional Korean fireplace, and of course the official portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. Suddenly, a weird-looking device appears in the living room above the entrance. It was not there when the family first entered, but someone understood his mistake and installed the missing device very quickly. On another shot of the same room, we can see the device in more detail. It looks like it has a loudspeaker and some additional controls, and it is plugged into some specially placed black socket. Another family enters the new home, and again we see the familiar white device with a blue back cover. TV image quality does not have much detail, but this looks like a standard European electrical outlet used in both North and South Koreas. In another video, we see the same device, but the outlet is different. It looks more like an American one. However, the pins are clearly round. So, what is it? Turns out, it is a receiver for North Korea's wired radio network called Third Broadcast. It is a copy of a similar Soviet system, and it was deployed since the establishment of the Kim family regime in the 1950s. I already made a video explaining Soviet system in detail, check it out later, but long story short, an analog audio signal of a relatively high voltage is broadcast through a separate network to each and every household in the country. The receiver is dead simple. It's just a step-down transformer and a loudspeaker. The third broadcast fits North Korea even better than it fit the USSR back in the day. One of the huge advantages of the system is that it does not require the household to have electricity supply in order to function properly. This feature is very useful, since rolling blackouts are still a common practice, especially outside of Pyongyang. Wired radio network remains the only media that guarantees the North Korean regime's omnipresent voice echoing through every nook and cranny of every home. Periodic household inspections performed by the Neighborhood Watch are famous for examining the mandatory Kim family portraits for dust and fingerprints. But very few know that those inspections also check the operation of the wired radio receiver. And those who don't have it in good working condition pay a small fine and must repair the radio for the next inspection. Another important feature of the wired radio system is its secrecy. Unlike normal radio broadcasting, no foreign observer can hear what is being broadcast on the wired radio. A classic example is the bizarre currency reform of 2009, when people were given only a week to exchange a maximum of $40 worth into the new currency, while the rest of their savings was wiped out. Everyone was shocked when they suddenly heard the news on the wired radio. Shortwave and FM stations excluded this information from the usual broadcasts so that the outside world would not notice anything. The wired radio system helps the North Korean regime address its population while keeping some information a secret from the outside world. The system itself is, in a way, a secret. Journalists and tourists are sometimes invited to a random Pyongyang apartment to see how ordinary people live in North Korea. Usually, it is the same set of random apartments. These apartments resemble typical Eastern European households with a late 90s to early 2000s interior design, which is unsurprising, given that the construction technology was heavily influenced by the USSR. For example, you see lighting switches installed at shoulder level to reduce wiring costs. You also see things you're not supposed to see, like large water buckets and scoops, indicating issues with the running water supply. You see wired landline phones all over the place, but you never see a wired radio receiver. At one point, I even started thinking that in Pyongyang, with all the flat-screen TVs and smartphones available, the system was starting to die out, just as it did in the former USSR. But I was wrong. Here is a 2022 video of a luxury riverside residential complex being personally presented to the public by Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. The woman accompanying him is Ri Chun-hee, a famous news anchor who has worked for Korean Central Television for more than 50 years. The Supreme Leader presents her with a fully equipped duplex apartment, which will cause her and her family to, quote, stay up all night in tears of deep gratitude for the party's benevolence. The apartment is quite decent. It has an air conditioning unit in every room and what appears to be a smart thermostat control. However, the kitchen lacks a refrigerator or even a designated space for one. Instead, there is a strangely positioned socket that is very likely intended for a wired radio. The TV image quality is once again rather poor, but here is a photo of the same apartment, and yes, it is indeed a wired radio socket. As in the USSR, North Koreans traditionally install the wired radio sockets in the kitchen, and continue to do so even in the open-plan kitchens of the high-end apartments. So yes, the Soviet-style wired radio system remains functional, even in the most luxurious skyscrapers of Pyongyang. The wired radio system also implements a very modern concept that traditional radio systems can only dream of: precise geo-targeting. The network is known to be divided into small districts, allowing different content to be broadcast to different areas. This feature is regularly used for civil defense drills. Additionally, when foreign delegations visit some city, residents of specific districts receive detailed instructions on where to go, how to dress for the occasion, and what to do upon arrival. North Korea's wired radio system is more active than ever, and all new housing continues to be equipped with wired radio sockets and receivers. Some receivers are connected via hanging wire, while others have built-in plugs, similar to many Soviet-era models. When plugged in, these units appear to be seamlessly integrated into the wall. Many Westerners, upon seeing them, mistakenly believe that North Korean apartments have an evil government radio that broadcasts propaganda 24/7 and cannot be turned off.
State radio is piped to every kitchen in the block. Listeners can turn the volume down, but not off.
Yes, there is no power button. You just turn the volume all the way down, Zoomer. I've examined nearly 1,000 different wired radio receivers produced throughout Soviet and post-Soviet history, and none of them exactly match the North Korean models we've seen. There are some similarities, but that's inevitable for such a simple appliance. My conclusion is, it's an independently developed device, not a copy of any Soviet model. And that's no surprise. These devices are incredibly simple. In the Soviet Union, most wired radio receivers weren't even produced in electronics factories. Instead, they were manufactured in plastic industry plants, since the majority of the work involved designing and molding the plastic casing. The sheer variety of these devices, nearly 1,000 different models as I mentioned, can be explained by the size of the system. By the late 1980s, the USSR had 80 million active wide radio receivers. Each major city had its own plastics manufacturing plant, producing a range of locally made receivers. A completely useless superpower idea. Give me a photo of a Soviet kitchen, and I'll find the wired radio receiver, identify the model, and tell you which city the photo was taken in. But in North Korea, a much smaller country, that's just not possible. Based on what I've seen in videos, only 2 types of wired radio receivers are currently in production. I'm sure they have plenty of memes about the wired radio. They just can't share them with us yet. We in the Soviet Union certainly had some. One of the sayings, still occasionally used today, is blasting from every iron. What does it mean? Well, basically, it's another way of saying blasting from every speaker. You see, Soviet wired radios used the same type of plugs as regular electrical appliances. They simply had to be connected to a special radio socket. Since the plugs were 100% compatible, it was easy to mix them up. If you accidentally plugged the wired radio into a standard electrical socket, well, nothing good happened. We'll get to that later. However, if you plugged something like an electric shaver or an iron into the wired radio socket, you could actually hear music.
Звук вообще странный. Вот слушай.
The analog audio signal from the wired radio network carried enough power to make the iron's heating element vibrate at the signal's frequency, producing an audible sound. Hence the phrase «It's blasting from every iron» звучит из каждого утюга. There is a Soviet anecdote about plugging wrong devices into wrong outlets. Why does the radio say that Soviet people live happy and prosperous lives, but my fridge is always empty? Well, you should try plugging your fridge into the radio outlet. The fact that wired radio receivers became an integral part of the country's cultural identity and an unspoken symbol of each region led to an interesting concept: Souvenir wired radio receivers. Now, after vacation in the Caucasus mineral waters, you could bring home a locally produced Beshtau wired radio receiver featuring the silhouette of the famous mountain of the same name. An educational tour to the ancient city of Vladimir would be forever commemorated with a wired radio receiver depicting the 20th century city gate. A business trip to eastern Belarus might not only earn you a promotion, but also a uniquely shaped wired radio receiver named Gomel, inspired by the city's Soviet avant-garde architecture. Traveling along the Silk Road in Kazakhstan, you might come across an Otrar wired radio receiver with a gold-painted loudspeaker representing the dome of a medieval mosque. The list goes on. 7 years of the October Revolution, time for a commemorative wired radio receiver. The 25th Congress of the Communist Party, another wired radio receiver for everyone. Sunflowers, Kazakhs, space, more revolution. Got a new intern into plastics factory? Keep them busy. Let them design a Souvenir wired radio receiver. It was a great opportunity for young talents to express themselves and come up with fresh ideas. For example, the Beshtau wired radio receiver mentioned earlier had a clever design that prevented it from being plugged into a standard electrical outlet. Wired radio sockets were always round, so that worked perfectly. However, most of the time, if you did plug a wired radio receiver into a 220-volt socket, nothing catastrophic happened. It just blasted the line frequency and its odd harmonics very loudly. But if you didn't realize your mistake and kept listening to this awful sound, within a few minutes...
Вот и все.
the speaker coil would overheat and burn, and the speaker cone, made of paper, would start to smolder. There is another anecdote. An old man and an old woman bought a wired radio receiver and plugged it into the electrical socket. The old woman asks, "Why is it silent?" The old man replies, "Can't you see? Let them finish smoking, then they'll start." Communist wired radio technology underwent an interesting transformation in the capitalist world. In the summer of 2003, my city in Siberia, Novosibirsk, celebrated its 110th anniversary. Oligarchy groups from the city hall commissioned the mass production of a commemorative radio receiver, which was distributed for free as a practical souvenir. The primary audience were elderly women who missed their wired radios while tending to their summer cottage gardens. For ease of use, these receivers were pre-tuned to 3 radio stations, all of which promoted the United Russia political party. Later that year, United Russia won the parliamentary elections and has remained in power ever since. I still have a wired radio in my kitchen. There is a $10 Bluetooth receiver and a power amplifier board hidden behind it, allowing it to connect to my iPhone. When I'm cooking, I listen to podcasts, and they sound exactly the same as the good old wired radio did in my grandmother's kitchen 25 years ago.